It looked like a simple motherhood photo from 1920, but became an unsolved mystery. In September 2024, antique dealer Marcus Thompson was cataloging items from an estate sale in Detroit's historic Corktown neighborhood when he discovered a photograph that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about a 1920s missing person case. Hidden inside a worn leather Bible, the black and white image showed a young woman in a white dress holding an infant, standing in front of what appeared to be a modest wooden house. The photograph bore a photographer's stamp from Kowalski Studios, Detroit, and was dated June 15, 1920. At first glance, it appeared to be a typical motherhood portrait from the post-World War I era, the kind of sentimental image new mothers often commissioned to commemorate their children's early months. However, when Thompson examined the photograph more closely, he noticed something unusual about the woman's expression. Despite holding her baby, her face showed no maternal joy or contentment. Instead, her eyes appeared fearful, almost desperate, and her grip on the infant seemed protective rather than tender. More puzzling was the setting. The house in the background didn't match the professional studio backdrop typical of formal portraits from that period. The image appeared to have been taken outdoors, in natural light, suggesting either an informal family snapshot or a hurried documentation for unknown purposes. Thompson, who specialized in Detroit historical artifacts, recognized the architectural style of the house as typical of the working-class Polish immigrant neighborhood that had flourished in Detroit during the 1910s and 1920s. The woman's clothing, while clean and well-maintained, appeared modest, suggesting she was not wealthy enough to afford an elaborate studio portrait. When Thompson researched the Kowalski Studios stamp, he discovered that the photography business had operated in Detroit from 1918 to 1923, serving primarily Polish and Eastern European immigrant families. The studio's records, he learned, had been donated to the Detroit Historical Society after the business closed. What Thompson couldn't have anticipated was that this seemingly simple motherhood photograph would connect to one of Detroit's most puzzling missing person cases from the Prohibition era, a mystery that had remained unsolved for over a century. The Bible containing the photograph had belonged to the Novak family, longtime residents of Corktown, whose descendants were selling the family home. Mrs. Helen Novak, 82, remembered the photograph from her childhood, but had never known the identity of the woman and child pictured. "My grandmother always kept that picture in her Bible," Mrs. Novak told Thompson. "When I asked about it as a child, she would just say it was someone who needed prayers and change the subject." The Detroit Historical Society's archives occupied the basement level of the old City Hall, where decades of immigrant family records had been carefully preserved by generations of volunteer historians. When Marcus Thompson contacted the Society about the mysterious photograph, archivist Dr. Maria Kowalski, granddaughter of the studio's original owner, agreed to search through her grandfather's meticulously kept business records. "Grandfather documented every commission, even informal ones," Dr. Kowalski explained as she pulled out ledgers from 1920. He believed photographs were historical documents that future generations would treasure. He never imagined they might become evidence in unsolved mysteries. The studio records for June 15, 1920 revealed an unusual entry that immediately caught Thompson's attention. Instead of the typical client name and address, the notation simply read, "Emergency commission, young mother with infant, payment, $2. 0. Location, fieldwork, special circumstances." Fieldwork was Stefan Kowalski's term for photographs taken outside his studio, usually for families who couldn't travel due to illness or poverty. However, the special circumstances notation was unique in the business records, appearing nowhere else in 5 years of detailed documentation. Dr. Kowalski found additional clues in her grandfather's personal diary, which he had kept separate from his business records. The entry for June 15, 1920, provided disturbing context. Approached by young Polish woman near Bagley Street, clearly distressed, carrying infant, requested immediate photograph for family records. Paid in cash, would not provide name or address. Spoke broken English, appeared frightened. Completed commission quickly due to her obvious distress. The diary entry continued. Woman insisted photograph be taken in front of specific house on 23rd Street. Would not explain significance of location. Left immediately after session completed. Developed plate same day. Something about her expression troubles me greatly. Stefan Kowalski's records showed that he had made several attempts to locate the woman after developing the photograph, hoping to deliver additional prints. His inquiries throughout the Polish community had yielded no information about a young mother matching her description. More concerning was a note Stefan had added to his diary 3 weeks later. Inquired at St. Albertus Church about mysterious young mother. Father Kowalski, no relation, reports no recent baptisms matching infant's apparent age, beginning to suspect woman may have been in some form of danger. The final reference to the mysterious photograph appeared in Stefan's diary on July 10, 1920. Police Detective Murphy visited studio asking about unidentified woman and infant. Provided copy of photograph taken June 15th. Detective would not explain nature of investigation but seemed very concerned about woman's welfare. Dr. Kowalski looked up from the diary. This suggests the photograph wasn't just a family portrait. It may have been connected to a police investigation. Detroit Police Department records from 1920 were stored in the city's central archives, a massive facility that housed over a century of criminal investigations, missing person cases, and incident reports. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen, who specialized in cold cases, agreed to help Thompson search for references to the mysterious photograph and its connection to any official investigations. The search through missing person files from summer 1920 revealed multiple cases involving young women and children, a reflection of the social upheaval following World War I and the economic challenges facing immigrant families during the early Prohibition era. However, one case immediately stood out as potentially connected to Stefan Kowalski's mysterious photograph. On June 18, 1920, just 3 days after the photograph was taken, Detective Patrick Murphy had filed a missing person report for Anna Kowalczyk, age 19, and her infant son, Stanisław, approximately 6 months old. The report had been filed by Anna's employer, Mrs. Margaret Harrison, who owned a boarding house on Michigan Avenue that catered to Polish immigrant families. Detective Murphy's investigation notes provided crucial details about Anna's circumstances. She had arrived in Detroit 6 months earlier from a small farming community outside Krakow, Poland, carrying documents identifying her as a war widow whose husband had died in the final months of World War I. Mrs. Harrison's statement, preserved in the police files, painted a picture of a hard-working but mysterious young woman. Anna was an excellent boarder, quiet, clean, always paid her rent on time, Harrison had told police. She worked at the Ford Highland Park plant and cared for her baby during off hours, but she never spoke about her past or family back in Poland. The investigation notes revealed several concerning details about Anna's behavior in the weeks before her disappearance. Fellow boarders reported that she had become increasingly anxious, frequently checking the street from her window and jumping at unexpected sounds. She had also been seen burning letters and documents in the boarding house's back courtyard. Most significantly, Anna had confided to another Polish boarder, Mrs. Józefa Nowak, that she was waiting for someone to find her, and that she needed to protect Stanisław from the people who killed his father. When Mrs. Nowak pressed for details, Anna had refused to elaborate. Detective Murphy's notes indicated that he had visited Stefan Kowalski's photography studio on July 8, 1920, after learning that Anna had been seen carrying a camera receipt from the business. The timing matched Stefan's diary entry about the police visit. However, the investigation had reached a dead end when no additional witnesses could be located, and Anna's employer found her room completely empty, as if she had never lived there at all. The case file's final entry, dated August 15, 1920, noted that the investigation was being suspended due to lack of evidence and leads. Thompson's research into Anna Kowalczyk's background required consulting immigration records at the National Archives and Polish community organizations that had assisted immigrants during the post-war period. What he discovered was a story of tragedy, survival, and desperation that explained why Anna had been so fearful in the weeks before her disappearance. Immigration documents showed that Anna had indeed arrived in New York on December 12, 1919, aboard the steamship Polonia from Gdansk. However, her passenger manifest contained discrepancies that suggested she had been traveling under false documentation. The listed address in Poland didn't exist, and her stated destination of Detroit, Michigan was unusual for someone with no known family connections in the city. Polish Red Cross records, accessed through International Historical Archives, revealed the tragic circumstances that had forced Anna to flee Poland. Her husband, Sergeant Tomasz Kowalczyk, had not died in combat as she had claimed. Instead, he had been executed in March 1919 by Polish government forces for allegedly collaborating with German occupiers during the war. The execution had been part of a broader purge of suspected collaborators in post-war Poland, but records suggested that many of the accusations were based on unreliable information and personal vendettas rather than concrete evidence. Tomasz Kowalczyk appeared to have been targeted because he had worked as a translator for German administrative offices, a position many Polish civilians had been forced to accept during the occupation. Documents from the Polish Ministry of Interior, declassified in the 1990s, showed that Anna had been under surveillance following her husband's execution. Government agents suspected she possessed documents or information that could embarrass officials involved in the post-war purges. Anna had fled Poland with her infant son after receiving warnings from sympathetic neighbors that she was about to be arrested. The false immigration documents had been provided by a network of Polish immigrants who helped families escape political persecution. However, Anna's problems had followed her to America. Polish community leaders in Detroit's immigrant neighborhoods reported to Thompson that there had been rumors in 1920 about government agents asking questions about recent arrivals from the Krakow region. Father Jan Kowalski at St. Alberta's Church, whose parish records had been preserved since 1919, confirmed that Anna had attended services but had never registered with the church or requested any official documentation for her son. Unusual behavior for a devout Catholic immigrant. The evidence suggested that Anna had been hiding in Detroit, using her job at the Ford plant and anonymous boarding house room to avoid detection, while hoping to build a new life for herself in Stanislaw. The photograph, Thompson realized, might have been Anna's attempt to create a visual record of her and her son's existence in America, perhaps as evidence for future legal proceedings or as documentation to send to family members still in Poland. Anna Kowalczyk's employment at Ford Motor Company's Highland Park plant provided another avenue for Thompson's investigation. Ford's personnel records from the early 1920s had been preserved as part of the company's historical archives, offering insight into the working conditions and employee monitoring systems that would have affected Anna's daily life. Ford's hiring records showed that Anna had been employed as a parts inspector in the carburetor assembly section, earning $5.50 per day, a substantial wage for a young woman in 1920. However, the company's detailed employee monitoring system, implemented as part of Henry Ford's sociological department, had tracked Anna's behavior both inside and outside the factory. Company social workers, whose job was to ensure employees met Ford's moral and social standards, had filed several reports about Anna between February and June 1920. These reports, preserved in Ford's personnel files, painted a picture of a hardworking but increasingly troubled employee. Employee Anna Kowalczyk demonstrates excellent work performance and punctuality, wrote social worker Margaret Stevens in a March 1920 report. However, she exhibits signs of nervous exhaustion and refuses all offers of company social services. Subject maintains no social connections with fellow Polish employees and appears to actively avoid community involvement. More concerning were reports from May 1920 indicating that Anna had been approached by individuals outside the plant gates who were not Ford employees. Company security guards had noted these interactions because they violated Ford's policy against solicitation on company property. Security supervisor James Miller's report, dated May 15, 1920, described an incident where two well-dressed men of foreign appearance had attempted to speak with Anna as she left her shift. When guards intervened, the men had claimed to be family friends from the old country, but had left immediately when asked for identification. Anna had reported to her supervisor that she didn't recognize the men and was concerned about their intentions. Ford's security department had increased monitoring of the plant gates following this incident, but no further approaches were documented. However, Ford's records revealed that Anna's work performance had deteriorated significantly in the weeks following the May 15th incident. She had begun arriving late, making errors in her inspection work, and requesting frequent breaks, all highly unusual for an employee who had previously been exemplary. Her final time card entry was dated June 16, 1920, one day after Stefan Kowalski had taken her photograph. Anna had clocked in for the morning shift but had left during lunch break and never returned. Ford's personnel department had attempted to contact Anna at her boarding house address when she failed to report for work, but Mrs. Harrison had informed them that Anna and her infant son had disappeared without notice. The company's final notation in Anna's file, dated June 25, 1920, classified her as terminated for abandonment of position, and noted that her final paycheck had been returned unclaimed. Mrs. Margaret Harrison's boarding house on Michigan Avenue had served Detroit's Polish immigrant community for over 2 decades, providing affordable housing and a support network for families adapting to American life. Thompson's investigation into Anna's living situation there revealed additional clues about her mysterious disappearance and the significance of the photograph. The boarding house's guest registry, preserved by the Harrison family descendants, showed that Anna had rented room 7 on the 2nd floor from December 20, 1919 through June 18, 1920. Her rent payments, recorded in Mrs. Harrison's meticulous financial ledgers, had been made punctually every week until the final payment, which had been made 3 days in advance of her disappearance. Mrs. Harrison's personal diary, discovered by her granddaughter Linda Harrison Smith during a family estate cleaning, provided intimate details about Anna's behavior during her final weeks at the boarding house. The entries revealed a young woman living in constant fear while desperately trying to protect her infant son. "Anna has become increasingly agitated," Mrs. Harrison wrote on May 20, 1920. "She barely sleeps, spends hours watching the street from her window, and jumps at every unexpected sound. Yesterday I found her crying over baby Stanislaw, saying she wished she could take him somewhere safe where the bad men cannot find us." The diary entries also documented strange visitors who had inquired about Anna. On June 1, 1920, Mrs. Harrison recorded, "2 men came asking about Mrs. Kowalczyk from Poland. They spoke with accents but claimed to be from immigration authorities. Something felt wrong about them. They knew too much about Anna's background but couldn't provide proper identification when I requested it." Mrs. Harrison had refused to confirm whether Anna lived at the boarding house, but she noted that the men had seemed familiar with the building's layout and had specifically asked about the young woman with the baby in room 7. Fellow boarder Mrs. Józefa Nowak, who had befriended Anna despite her secretive nature, provided additional context in a 1920 statement to police that Thompson found in the investigation files. According to Mrs. Nowak, Anna had confided that she possessed papers that proved important men were liars, and that these documents made her valuable to some people and dangerous to others. Anna had also told Mrs. Nowak that she had taken the photograph with baby Stanislaw as proof that we were here in case something happens to us. She had specifically mentioned wanting the picture taken in front of the house where we were supposed to be safe, on 23rd Street. Mrs. Nowak's statement revealed that Anna had been planning to leave Detroit even before her final disappearance. She had been saving money beyond her basic living expenses and had asked about other cities with large Polish communities where a woman with a baby could disappear and start over. The boarding house's basement, according to Linda Harrison Smith, had yielded additional evidence during a 1950s renovation. Workers had discovered a small metal box hidden behind a loose brick in the foundation wall. The box contained Polish documents that appeared to be official government papers, along with a note written in Polish that roughly translated to, "If something happens to me, please make sure Stanislaw knows his father was a good man who loved his country." The location where Stefan Kowalski had photographed Anna and baby Stanislaw, the house on 23rd Street that Anna had specifically requested as the backdrop, proved to be crucial to understanding her story. Thompson's research into the property records revealed a connection to Detroit's Polish underground network that had operated during the early 1920s. City records showed that the modest wooden house at 1247 East 23rd Street had been owned by Stanislaw Kowalski, no relation to the photographer, a Polish immigrant who had arrived in Detroit in 1915. Kowalski operated a small grocery store that served the Polish community, but his property tax records and business licenses suggested he earned significantly more income than his modest store could have generated. Federal Bureau of Investigation files, declassified in the 1970s under the Freedom of Information Act, revealed that Stanislaw Kowalski had been under surveillance during 1919-1920 as a suspected organizer of assistance for Polish political refugees. The FBI had identified his grocery store as a meeting place for immigrants who were helping compatriots escape political persecution in post-war Poland. Agent reports described a network that provided false documentation, temporary housing, and financial assistance to Polish families fleeing government retaliation. The 23rd Street house had apparently served as a safe house where refugees could stay while waiting for permanent relocation to other cities. Thompson's interview with Kowalski's granddaughter, Maria Kowalski-Chen, provided confirmation of the family's covert activities. Grandfather never spoke directly about what he did during those years, she explained. But our family always knew he helped people who were in trouble back in Poland. He would say that America was supposed to be safe for people escaping persecution. FBI surveillance reports from June 1920 noted increased activity around the 23rd Street property, with agents observing various individuals of Polish origin visiting the residence at unusual hours. However, the reports made no specific mention of Anna Kowalczyk or her infant son. Maria Kowalski-Chen revealed that her grandfather had kept a private journal documenting the families he had assisted, but the journal had been destroyed in a house fire in 1942. However, she remembered family stories about a young mother with a baby who stayed with us briefly in 1920 and who had been especially frightened of being found. According to family oral history, Anna had arrived at the safe house in mid-June 1920, claiming that government agents were tracking her movements in Detroit. She had requested help leaving the city, but had insisted on having a photograph taken in front of the house first. The story passed down in our family was that she wanted proof that good people had tried to help her, Maria explained. She said if anything happened to her, someone should know that there were Americans who cared about protecting innocent people. The timing aligned perfectly with Stefan Kowalski's photograph session on June 15, 1920. Anna had apparently used the safe house as her backdrop because it represented hope and protection, even though she was planning to leave Detroit immediately afterward. Property records showed that Stanislaw Kowalski had sold the house in August 1920 and moved his family to Chicago, suggesting that the Polish Refugee Assistance Network had been compromised or threatened following Anna's disappearance. Following leads about Stanislaw Kowalski's sudden relocation to Chicago, Thompson expanded his investigation to include Polish community records in that city. What he discovered was evidence of a broader network that had been helping Polish political refugees throughout the Midwest, and possible clues about Anna's ultimate fate. Chicago's Polish-American Historical Association had preserved extensive records from the early 1920s, including documentation of assistance provided to refugees from political persecution in Poland. Archivist Dr. Tomasz Kowalski, a distant relative of the Detroit safe house operator, provided Thompson access to confidential files that had been sealed for decades. These records revealed that Anna Kowalczyk and her infant son had indeed reached Chicago in late June 1920, arriving at St. Stanislaus Kostka Church on the city's northwest side. Father Franciszek Kowalski, the parish priest, had noted in church records that a young mother with an infant had sought sanctuary, claiming to be fleeing government persecution for her husband's activities in Poland. However, Anna's stay in Chicago had been brief and troubled. Church records indicated that she had become increasingly paranoid about being discovered, refusing to register for any official services and avoiding contact with other Polish families who might remember her. Mrs. Katarzyna Nowak, an elderly parishioner who had helped care for refugee families, had left detailed notes about Anna's behavior during her Chicago stay. According to these notes, Anna had insisted that men with official papers were following her across multiple cities and would eventually track her to Chicago. Anna had also told Mrs. Nowak that she possessed documents proving her husband's innocence of collaboration charges, but that these same documents implicated important people in the new Polish government in corruption and false accusations. She feared that killing her would be easier than allowing her to reveal the truth. The Chicago records contained a disturbing entry dated July 2, 1920. Young mother Anna reported seeing suspicious men asking questions at nearby boarding houses. Father Kowalski has arranged emergency relocation to Milwaukee for mother and infant. Situation appears dangerous. However, Milwaukee church records, which Thompson accessed through interdiocesan historical archives, showed no record of Anna or Stanislaw arriving at any Polish parish in that city. The trail appeared to go cold in early July 1920. The most significant discovery came from Chicago Police Department archives, where Thompson found a missing person report filed on July 15, 1920 by Father Kowalski. The priest had reported that Anna and her infant son had disappeared from their temporary housing without explanation, leaving behind only a brief note thanking the church for its assistance. The note, preserved in police files, concluded with a chilling statement. "I cannot bring danger to good people anymore. Stanislaw and I must find our own way to safety, even if it means we disappear forever." Chicago police had conducted a brief investigation but found no evidence of foul play. The case had been classified as a voluntary disappearance and quickly forgotten amid the city's growing crime problems during Prohibition. Thompson's research had uncovered enough evidence to suggest that Anna Kowalczyk's case involved international political intrigue that might have attracted federal law enforcement attention. His inquiry to the National Archives about any federal investigation into Polish refugee networks during 1920 yielded surprising results. The Bureau of Investigation, predecessor to the FBI, had indeed been monitoring Polish immigrant communities during the post-World War I period, concerned about potential communist infiltration and foreign political activities on American soil. Agent reports from 1920 documented surveillance of the exact network that had been helping Anna. Special Agent William Morrison's reports, declassified in 1985, revealed that federal authorities had identified Anna Kowalczyk as a person of interest in their investigation of Polish political activities. However, their interest in her was not as a fugitive, but as a potential witness who could provide information about corruption in the new Polish government. Morrison's report from June 20, 1920 stated, "Subject Anna Kowalczyk, Polish national, believed to possess documentary evidence of false collaboration charges filed against Polish civilians during post-war tribunals. Information could be valuable for State Department assessment of current Polish government reliability." The federal investigation had been prompted by complaints from Polish-American organizations that the new Polish government was using collaboration charges to eliminate political opponents and seize property from wealthy families. Anna's case had become important because her husband's execution records suggested a pattern of false accusations. However, Morrison's reports revealed that Anna had been impossible to locate for official questioning. Federal agents had tracked her to Detroit, then Chicago, but had consistently arrived at each location after she had already moved on. A July 10, 1920, report noted, "Subject appears to be aware of official interest in her case and is actively avoiding contact with both local and federal authorities. Network of Polish refugees is providing assistance with relocation, making apprehension for voluntary questioning extremely difficult." The federal investigation had been complicated by the fact that Anna was not charged with any crime and had every right to avoid government contact. Agents could only attempt to locate her for voluntary cooperation, which she clearly had no intention of providing. Morrison's final report on the case, dated August 30, 1920, concluded, "Subject Anna Kowalczyk and infant son believed to have left the United States voluntarily. Investigation suspended due to lack of cooperation from subject and absence of criminal charges, justifying continued pursuit." However, Thompson discovered that this conclusion might have been incorrect. Immigration records showed no departure documented for Anna or Stanisław, suggesting they had either remained in the United States under false identities or had left the country illegally. The federal files contained one final piece of evidence, a photograph identical to the one Stefan Kowalski had taken on June 15, 1920. Agent Morrison had somehow obtained a copy, suggesting that the Detroit Police Department had shared information with federal investigators. More than a century after Anna Kowalczyk and her infant son Stanisław disappeared from Detroit, their fate remains one of the city's most intriguing unsolved mysteries. Thompson's investigation had uncovered a complex story of political persecution, refugee networks, and government surveillance. But the ultimate truth about what happened to Anna and her baby continues to elude historians and investigators. The photograph that started Thompson's investigation has been donated to the Polish-American Historical Museum in Detroit, where it serves as a powerful reminder of the challenges faced by immigrants fleeing political persecution. The image, which initially appeared to be a simple motherhood portrait, has been revealed as a desperate woman's attempt to document her existence in America before disappearing forever. Dr. Maria Kowalski from the Detroit Historical Society has used Thompson's research to create an exhibit about Polish refugee networks during the early 1920s. Anna's story represents thousands of immigrants who came to America not seeking opportunity, but fleeing persecution, she explains. Many of these stories were lost because people were afraid to document their experiences. Modern experts have developed several theories about Anna's ultimate fate. Immigration historian Dr. James Chen believes Anna and Stanisław likely assumed new identities and settled in a rural area where questions about their background would be less likely. Small farming communities throughout the Midwest absorbed many immigrants who needed to disappear from official records, he notes. However, criminal investigator Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen suggests a more disturbing possibility. The evidence indicates Anna possessed documents that could have embarrassed the Polish government and implicated American officials who supported the post-war purges, she explains. People with that kind of information sometimes disappear permanently. The most hopeful theory comes from genealogist Maria Kowalski-Chin, who believes Anna may have successfully escaped to Canada, where Polish refugee networks were also active. Canadian immigration records from that period are incomplete, but there were established routes for helping people cross the border and start new lives, she notes. In 2024, Thompson's research inspired a renewed effort to locate descendants of Anna and Stanisław. DNA testing of Polish-American families throughout the Midwest has yielded no confirmed matches, but several families have come forward with oral histories about relatives who appeared suddenly in their communities during the early 1920s. The original boarding house where Anna lived has been converted to a historical marker commemorating Detroit's Polish immigrant community. Mrs. Harrison's guest registry, containing Anna's signature and rental payments, is displayed as evidence of the thousands of refugees who found temporary safety in Detroit's ethnic neighborhoods. Stefan Kowalski's photography studio building still stands on Michigan Avenue, now housing a community center that serves immigrants from various countries. A small plaque honors Stefan's role in documenting immigrant experiences during a turbulent period in American history. The mystery of Anna Kowalczyk remains unsolved, but her story has become a symbol of the countless immigrants whose experiences were shaped by the political upheavals of the early 20th century. The simple motherhood photograph from 1920 continues to serve as evidence that behind every immigrant family portrait lies a complex story of survival, hope, and the search for safety in an uncertain world. Whether Anna and Stanisław found the peace and security they sought, or whether they became victims of the political forces they were fleeing, may never be known. But their photograph ensures that their story, and the stories of countless others like them, will not be forgotten.